And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas, gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Today's July the 7th, 188th day of this year. Falls exactly midway through the calendar with 177 days remaining to the year's over with. Date is globally celebrated as World Chocolate Day. Marks several distinct cultural and national observances. In Japan, we have Tanabata, also known as the Star Festival. This holiday celebrates the meeting of the deities over Jaime and Hikabashi, the stars, Vega and Altair. People write their wishes on small pieces of paper and tie them to bamboo for the deities to look at. In the Solomon Islands, it's Independence Day. Commemorates the nation's independence from the UK in 1978. And in Tanzania, it's Saba Day. Celebrates the formation of Tanganyika African National Union in 1954. And under the heading Better Late Than Never, 1456, it was a retrial for Joan of Arc. She was acquitted. It took place 25 years after she was actually burned at the stake. The 1798, the U.S. Congress officially rescinded treaties with France, kicking off the undeclared naval war known as the Quasi-War. And in 2005, the UK capital was struck by a series of coordinated deadly terrorist attacks on the transport network. They got an undeclared situation going on there now that they refuse to address. Well, let's look at the stories in the news today, because there's always something going on. Well, President Trump arrives at the NATO summit as Iran rift looms above alliance talks. President Trump is arriving at the Turkey-held NATO summit with fresh frustration towards several European allies over their responses to the U.S.-led operations against Iran. Opens a new front on his long-running campaign to pressure the alliance and burden sharing. The summit, which takes place today and tomorrow in Ankara, Turkey, expected to focus on defense spending, Ukraine and NATO's long-term strategy toward Russia as well. To bring President Trump face-to-face with some of his biggest foes in NATO, including Spain, whose prime minister, Pedro Sanchez, has called the U.S. war with Iran illegal, absurd, and cruel. U.S. Ambassador to NATO, Matthew Whitaker, said Wednesday that President Trump remains disappointed by allies that declined to allow U.S. forces to use military bases or give them overflight rights during the operation, as well as by political statements criticizing the strikes. According to Whitaker, the president expressed his disappointment in both a couple of our allies' unwillingness to support us using our bases in their countries. And as importantly, he's also incredibly disappointed in the political statements that came out around the time of the launch of Operation Epic Fury. Disagreements are expected to loom over a summit where President Trump will once again press allies to increase defense spending, also raising broader questions about whether NATO members are prepared to back the United States during conflicts beyond the alliance's traditional focus on Europe. And his frustration has been evident publicly as well. Well, we'll see what, there's no real requirement to keep NATO. When I say we, I mean the NATO members are actually one of the main supports for the security of Europe. But if they don't want to work in unison with us. Why do we need them? Well, Charlie Kirk's family comes face to face with the accused assassin for the first time. Stories out of Provo, Utah. Family of Charlie Kirk came face to face with his accused assassin for the first time in a Utah courtroom yesterday. First day of what's expected to be a week-long preliminary hearing. Tyler Robinson, 28, was already in the room when the members of the media were allowed in at 8:55 a.m. Wearing a gray suit, pink shirt, black tie with his wrists and ankles cuffed. Later in the morning, when videos of Kirk's shooting death were played for the sides and the judge, he showed no visible response when the sound of the fatal gunshot rang out. The Utah State Bureau of Investigation agent David Hull was on the stand to introduce several videos, including images of Kirk's death that were not shown publicly in court, but were shown to the judge and the attorneys for both sides. Two of them were described as showing the moment a sniper's bullet hit Kirk in the neck, and included audio that reporters could hear. And while Judge Tony Graff Jr. flinched and leaned away from the screen when the shot rang out in one of the videos, Robinson remained still during both. Kirk's family already left the courtroom before they were played. They were expected to receive warnings before graphic evidence would be introduced, and left twice ahead of mentions of the assassination itself. Well, we'll see what comes of this trial. Raleigh mayor considers a youth curfew following teen takeover and violent July 4th weekend. Mayor of Raleigh, North Carolina is weighing whether to impose a curfew for minors after a series of shootings and chaotic events over the Independence Day weekend. During that time, several fights broke out and 9 people were shot amid a series of teen takeovers across the country. The violence over the holiday weekend and prompted Mayor Janet Cowell to tell WRAL News she's considering enacting a curfew for those aged 17 and under. She said, as mayor, I'm grateful for the actions of the Raleigh police officers in response to the situation of juvenile violence across the city on the night of July 4th and the morning of July 5th. Clearly, Raleigh is not exempt from the incidents of youth violence that are occurring across the country. We need to talk with the youth, their parents, schools, and the broader community to understand root causes and better coordinate strategies. Well, there's no confusion about the causes. They think they can get away with it. Why wouldn't they go on a rampage? Well, Team USA's World Cup run ends as Belgium wins a round of 16 matchup to advance. Belgium, in front of a sold-out U.S. heavy crowd in Seattle, defeated the USMNT 4-1 in a match where they took full advantage of their opponent's mistakes. Charles de Ketelaere was the man who not only scored just 9 minutes into the match for Belgium. His goal in the 39th minute made Team USA manager Mauricio Pochettino kick water bottles on the sideline. And the reason? Malik Tillman, who scored a free kick against Bosnia and Herzegovina in a round of 32 victory in the Bay Area, took another just in front of Belgium's box, and it deflected off a Belgian defender and threw off legendary keeper Thibaut Courtois to even the game at 1 apiece. Well, everything comes to an end. And so did our participation in the World Cup. Ex-Warren campaign volunteer spotted praising murderous ex-Iranian leader. Far-left activist who previously helped organize youth support for Senator Ed Markey, Democrat of Massachusetts, and volunteered for Senator Elizabeth Warren, Democrat of Massachusetts, presidential campaign, appeared in an Iranian state media interview praising the late Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, calling him the greatest anti-imperialist leader of her lifetime. Kyla Walsh, who described herself as a journalist from the U.S., working in Lebanon, made the remarks in an interview aired by Iranian state media, Press TV, during the outlet's coverage of Khamenei's funeral. Walsh was previously profiled by Boston Magazine as a young organizer who helped form students for Mocki and played a pivotal role in Senator Mocki's 2020 primary win over the Representative Joe Kennedy III. There was volunteering for Senator Warren's presidential campaign. According to Walsh in the interview, he was a leader of all the people in the world who struggled against imperialism, against arrogance, against Zionism, against genocide. To me, he was the greatest anti-imperialist leader to live during my lifetime. During Khomeini's 37 years in power, multiple reports cited the regime killing thousands of its citizens, according to the National Council of Resistance of Iran. Her comments came with an Iranian flag seen in the background. Mandami aides unloaded on ABC executives after The View host called socialist candidate an anti-Semite. An aide to New York City Mayor Zoran Mandami reportedly lashed out at ABC executives after The View co-host Sarah Haynes called a Mandami-backed socialist congressional candidate an anti-Semite. Mandami flexed his political influence last month after three candidates that he endorsed in the New York congressional primaries, Brad Lander, Claire Valdez, and Daria Avila Chevalier won over Democratic establishment candidates. New York City mayor's team had pitched a liberal talk show to have the socialist candidates on, but the show had declined, according to Semaphore. Well, every dog has his day, so to speak. We'll see after Mandami has destroyed the infrastructure of New York City, what the citizens still think about him. Well, LeBron James seems to be heading back to Cleveland to end his career with the Cavaliers. At least it sounds like he's heading back to the Cleveland Cavaliers. While betting markets initially listed the Golden State Warriors and later the Philadelphia 76ers as the favorites to land James, reporters with the strongest NBA sources now list Cleveland as the clear frontrunner. Over the weekend, Substack reporter Mark Stein wrote that there's a growing belief among teams interested in James that the Cavaliers have the scenario to beat for his services. While Stein no longer works for a major sports network, he remains one of the few true authorities on the sport. He was the first insider to report that Kevin Durant was leaning toward the Brooklyn Nets in 2019, while much of the media continued reporting that the Knicks were the most likely destination. And on Monday, ESPN's Brian Windhorst echoed a similar sentiment. Well, so James is getting ready to retire, it looks like. Well, Trump's looking very strongly at the Australia-style retirement system. He says he's taking that and making it sharper. His Trump officials are studying the Aussie's superannuation models, thinking to make it a little bit stronger. President Trump's ongoing reforms to the American retirement system are getting inspiration from down under, it seems. Trump administration is working on an Australian-style retirement savings plan for American workers, suggesting the model could put people in a much better shape by retirement age, according to what the president said Monday. Well, let's see if he does have, that would have lasting impact if he did something like that. Colin Mabap, a blast despicable Paraguayan senator over vile colonized Cameroonian slur. French soccer star Kylian Mbappe, center of international uproar over a Paraguayan senator who posted racist remarks about him after France's World Cup win over Paraguay. The controversy began July 4th in Philadelphia when Mbappe scored on a 70th minute penalty to lift France to a 1-0 victory. After the final whistle, a photo of Mbappe celebrating in front of Paraguayan goalkeeper Orlando Gil spread across social media. Paraguayan Senator Celeste Amarilla, member of Paraguay's Liberal Radical Party, then posted some pretty wild remarks about the soccer style. On X, Amarilla called Mbappe a brute, claimed he grew up sucking on coconuts instead of breast milk, and said the most educated creatures he knew were chimpanzees. Can you say sore loser? Well, Plattner allies turned on him after a bombshell rape allegation rocks the campaign. Support from embattled Maine Senate candidate Graham Plattner's cratering among Democrats, with one of the most prominent supporters calling on him to exit the race after following a rape allegation. Representative Ro Khanna, Democrat of California, rescinded his endorsement and called on Plattner to suspend his campaign after a bombshell Politico report detailing a rape allegation by Maine resident Jenny Russicott, 41, who previously dated the scandal-plagued candidate. Plattner immediately denied Russicott's account, which alleges he barged into her home in 2021 and forced her to have unprotected sex, but has said his campaign is determining its next steps. She also went on CNN on Monday evening, shortly after the report was published, to tell host Jake Tapper that by dictionary definition, Plattner raped her. Well, he's a lightning rod for people who don't particularly care for him, so this just falls right in line. According to Russicott, I thought, here's a man who was drunk, who by dictionary definition raped me, and he's blaming drunk women. So I just felt like there was a very odd take to have on that. I also feel like with all the comments that he made about women, sexual assault, rape, even the comments he made that was in the New York Times article about threatening people with rape. Like, why does this person have this issue? Scattered them throughout their life, throughout their commentary, like it's on their mind. Well, of course, he of the Nazi tattoo is already the target of a lot of allegations. We'll see if he drops out of the campaign. Well, Democrats have abandoned candidate Graham Plattner after the rape allegation implodes his Senate bid. Democrats turned on Maine Senate candidate Graham Plattner on Monday after a rape allegation triggered a full-on revolt among its most prominent supporters, with calls pouring in from across the party for him to suspend his campaign. Mounting defections came after Maine resident Jenny Russicott, 41, accused him of rape in interviews with Politico and CNN, alleging the Senate hopeful entered her home uninvited while intoxicated nearly 5 years ago and forced himself on her despite repeated attempts to get him to stop. I do have to suggest that she waited a long time in order to bring up the allegations. Well, the roof collapse of a New Jersey store trapped shoppers inside as rescue crews searched the damaged building. Large emergency response was triggered in Monmouth County, New Jersey on Monday after a partial roof collapse at a local BJ's wholesale club trapped multiple people inside. This happened during a wave of severe weather. Just after 11:15 a.m. local time, emergency personnel rushed to the BJ's wholesale club on Route 35 in Ocean Township after reports of the collapse. That's according to a statement from the Monmouth County Sheriff's Office. This video appeared to show unsuspecting shoppers looking at grocery items seconds before the roof collapsed, sending a large amount of water gushing into the business. Authorities confirmed 27 people are inside the building at the time of the incident. No injuries were reported. 2 people are partially trapped in the debris but managed to free themselves and escape the building. Emergency teams deployed specialized rescue units to ensure the building was clear, conducted preliminary and secondary searches according to the sheriff's office. Monmouth County Sheriff's Office interior drone searched the structurally compromised building, along with New Jersey Urban Search and Rescue canine teams. So thus far, there's been no folks found inside, but hopefully they're going to continue to periodically search just in case. Well, experts are saying palace aides don't trust Prince Harry alone with King Charles. If Prince Harry gets FaceTime with King Charles during his latest drama-filled UK trip, it's not going to be a warm family reunion by any means. Palace aides are reportedly expected to tightly script every second to shield the monarch and the crown. According to British royal expert Hilary Fordrich, every interaction will need to be managed, even to the minute, by courtiers and those whose job it is to protect the monarchy. Merely polite meetings are more plausible. They're far more concerned with the overall institution and continuity than the feelings of any one family member, according to Fordrich. This has been a case for generations, and Harry ought to know better. Well, we'll see if there's any kind of reconciliation that can take place. Well, legal war on President Trump's agendas gained firepower as federal lawyers defect to the Democrats. Federal lawyers are leaving President Trump's administration and landing in Democratic state attorney general's offices in large numbers as blue states ramp up their legal fight against the president's second-term agenda. Employment data analyzed by New York Times indicates that more than 10,000 federal attorneys, about one-fifth of all lawyers employed by the federal government, have left their posts since 2025. Of these, Fox News Digital Review have identified well over 100 who've since begun working for Democratic Attorney General's offices. Legal filings showing that some of these lawyers are involved in cases challenging the Trump administration. Well, Trump derangement syndrome still runs strong. Well, yesterday we talked about some bizarre psychological operations such as Operation Wandering Soul, where the U.S. military attempted to take advantage of the superstition of the Vietnam people. Well, there's another action by the federal government that has gotten a lot of PR in the past. I'm talking about the NSA mass surveillance of American citizens, also known as the Snowden leaks. Now, the truth be known, if you think you can text and call and search and scroll, and nobody knows what you're doing but you, actually, your phone's not just simply a device, it's a data extraction terminal. Every tap and swipe and voice command is a signal, not just to the apps, but to subsystems that you don't sign up for. Systems you don't even know exist. And in 2013, Edward Snowden proved it. Now, he wasn't a hacker. He wasn't a criminal. He wasn't a rogue spy with a vendetta. He was actually a government contractor, a systems administrator, a man with top-level access to the NSA's internal architecture. So he didn't have to break into the system. He was already there. Worked for Booz Allen Hamilton, a private firm contracted by NSA. NSA, of course, is a national security agency. His job was actually to manage and maintain the systems that process classified data. In other words, he could see everything happening behind the curtain. And what he saw and what he did about it changed history. Turns out NSA wasn't just watching for suspected terrorists. It was watching everybody. And Snowden's leaks revealed that the U.S. government was collecting phone call metadata to include who you called and when and you made the call and how long you were on the call. Text message content, email data. Your emails are not secure, folks. Full internet browsing history, what apps you use, cloud backup, social media activity, location data from cell towers and GPS. And this was all being done without any warrants, without the permission of the users of the cell phones, without informing the public. The victims included U.S. citizens and journalists and foreign leaders and activists and tech companies and, frankly, entire populations. They weren't searching for the bad guys. They were building a surveillance architecture of everybody. A digital dragnet, if you will. A system designed not to catch criminals, but to actually catalog humanity. Now, before you poo-poo the very idea, these programs were real. They were documented. They were confirmed. Among the programs that came to light was PRISM, direct data access partnerships with Google and Apple and Microsoft and a number of others. XKeyscore, a search engine for everything users do online, from emails and chats to browsing. Then there was Section 215 metadata program, recording phone logs of millions of Americans. Muscular, secretly tapping into data flows between global data centers. And a program called, or a tool called Boundless Informant. That was a tool for visualizing global surveillance coverage. Now, the federal courts later ruled parts of the program were actually illegal. Tech companies, of course, quickly denied knowledge and quietly changed their policies. Congress scrambled to rewrite the law, but the system was already in place. It was real. It was intentional. And most importantly, it was secret until Snowden said something. Now, keep in mind, the reality of this situation is you weren't being watched just sometimes. You were being watched all the time. The question is not, are you being monitored? The question is actually, what are they looking for? Snowden just didn't expose surveillance, he exposed the illusion of privacy. He showed us the digital world we trust, our phones, our emails, our cloud backups, isn't ours. You may pay for cloud storage, but somebody else is watching for free. It's a mirror, and sometimes somebody else is looking in. I'm not talking about paranoia. It's about architecture, because once a system like this exists, it doesn't go away. It actually adapts and expands and it waits. And the scariest part of it, for its attention to be turned on you, you don't need to be guilty. You just need to be visible, I guess is the best term. Well, we've talked about psychological operations. We've talked about mass surveillance. Let's talk about transparency on the part of governments. You know, there's one war that took place that was actually started by a lie. The day was August 4th, 1964. Americans gathered around their TV sets, as most did every evening. President Lyndon I'm going to be King Johnson appeared on the screen, looking his usual solemn, resolute self. And he said with all sincerity, "We've been attacked. And the enemy that attacked us, North Vietnam. The implication from that statement? We were attacked. We have to respond with force. Now, I've always said, quite frankly, those who declare the wars should be required to go and take part in the wars. But of course, that's not how it works. Within days, Congress, at the urging of President Lyndon, I'm going to be King Johnson, passed the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. U.S. troops were mobilized. Bombs were dropped. The true Vietnam War began. But there's one interesting caveat to this war. The second attack on our ship in the Gulf of Tonkin didn't happen. It was a lie. Now, it was August 2nd, 1964. The USS Maddox was patrolling the Gulf of Tonkin off the coast of North Vietnam. 3 North Vietnamese torpedo boats approached. The Maddox fired warning shots. The North Vietnamese torpedo boats launched their torpedoes. There was a brief skirmish. The Maddox called in air support and escaped with minimal damage. Now, this was the first attack in the Gulf of Tonkin. It's a very real attack, even though it was limited in scope. Then came August the 4th, 1964. The Maddox and another ship, the USS Turner Joy, reported there had been a second attack. But a later review of internal communications showed an entirely different picture. Radar signals were misread. Sonar echoes are mistaken for torpedoes. There were actually no confirmation of enemy ships during this second attack. Weather conditions distorted visibility. So military officials at the time knew the story was shaky. They debated revealing it internally. Some questioned whether anything had actually happened at all. But they needed public support. They needed a resolution, a reason. So they sold certainty when they shouldn't have. And as a result of the lies told about this second attack, Congress got us into the Vietnam War. Over 50,000 casualties. Now, the narrative that was sold by Johnson and Congress, America was attacked. We have to defend ourselves. And the best defense is a good offense. So just like that, war was born. Now, this isn't speculation. It's all documented. 2020 hindsight. Declassified NSA documents that were declassified in 2005 confirmed the second attack was actually fabricated. Internal memos showed intelligence was cherry-picked to support the escalation. Eyewitness accounts contradicted the official story. Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense, later admitted the incident was misrepresented. And congressional records show the resolution passed with overwhelming support based on these false premises, based on lies. And the result of the lies, 58,000 American soldiers dead. Millions of Vietnamese civilians and fighters were killed. A decade of war and trauma and division. All built on a lie, a distortion. It wasn't a mistake. It was a manufactured moment, engineered to trigger conflict. Similar to the plan involved in Operation Northwoods. Wars don't always begin with violence. Sometimes they begin with a press conference. Gulf of Tonkin incident shows how fragile truth becomes when power needs a story. It reminds us that public opinion can be shaped in a single night by a single sentence. We've been attacked. When something like that comes out of the office of the president, you tend to believe it. That phrase didn't just justify the war, it silenced doubt, it drowned nuance, and it turned skepticism into treason. And once the narrative was set, the machinery of war rolled forward, unstoppable and unquestionable. This is a prime example of how governments manufacture consent, how fear is weaponized, how silence becomes complicity. Because when truth is bent to fit a headline, the cost isn't just credibility. The cost is actually lives. Well, from lying being the basis of the Vietnam War, let's talk about Project Sunshine. This was a study no parent consented to. It took place in hospitals and funeral homes and morgues across the country. It involved parents grieving babies who never grew up. The symbols of this program were tiny caskets and silent rooms, unanswered questions. And while the dead were mourned, government agents were actually taking the bones, not to honor, not to preserve, but to study. They didn't ask questions. They didn't tell anybody what they were doing. They didn't have any permission to do it. But when people say, I'm from the government, I'm here to help you, people have a tendency to cooperate. In the 1950s and 60s, the U.S. government was deeply concerned about the long-term effects of nuclear fallout, especially from atmospheric testing of atomic bombs. So in order to study the effects, they needed data. Specifically, they needed to measure strontium-90, radioactive isotope that settles in bones and teeth after exposure to nuclear fallout. So the geniuses that operate in the secrecy afforded by government service launched something called Project Sunshine. And the goal was to protect human tissue samples from around the world, especially from infants and children, because their developing bones absorbed radiation much more rapidly than did those of adults. But there were a number of points involved in this program that were never advertised. Remains were taken from hospitals and morgues and funeral homes. Bones and teeth were harvested from deceased infants and children. Families were never informed of what was happening. Consent was never requested from anybody. And in many cases, the bodies were actually returned to the families, but they were missing body parts. It wasn't a rogue operation. It was highly coordinated, funded, approved, all done in the name of science. It's called Project Sunshine because the results were meant to bring the truth to light. Somewhat ironic, don't you think? The proof of this program came from the 1955 Atomic Energy Commission transcripts. It confirmed knowledge of unauthorized remain use. There were internal memos that discussed the difficulty in obtaining suitable samples without alerting the families. The 1994 U.S. Presidential Advisory Committee on Human Radiation Experiments investigated and confirmed the details. And government officials actually publicly admitted the program's existence and ethical violations. This program happened. It's all documented. It's acknowledged. But a lot of the information vanished into the great black hole known as national security, don't you know? This kind of conspiracy is the type that doesn't feel real because it's too horrifying to want to believe. And that's exactly how it stayed hidden for so long. Project Sunshine wasn't about secret meetings or coded messages. It was about quiet violations, about the kind that happened in sterile rooms under fluorescent lights with clipboards and lab coats. It also reminds us conspiracy doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks clinical and procedural and institutional. And that's what makes it so dangerous, because when grief is exploited, when science forgets humanity, when trust is broken at the most vulnerable moment, that damage lasts for generations. This story doesn't talk about radiation. It's about consent. It's about the right to mourn without being mined, about the line between research and exploitation, and how easily that line is crossed when there's nobody watching. Well, not only do governments violate the rights of its citizens, sometimes big business does the same thing. Now, in this day and time, every other ad on TV is about what you ought to eat or shouldn't eat, or the most recent additive that you can order from the biggest companies out there. Well, one of the major operations that indulged in this was what's been known as Big Sugar. And Big Sugar had its own science scam. Actually, the sugar industry paid scientists to lie and reshape American nutrition. Now imagine, if you will, waking up one morning and discovering that everything you were taught about healthy eating was a lie. That includes the food pyramid, the low-fat craze, the school lunch menus, the cereal boxes with heart-healthy labels, margarine instead of butter, Snackwell cookies instead of almonds. All of it being based not on not on science, but on strategy. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't bad data. It was a coordinated cover-up. Now, this isn't a theory. This is information found after following a paper trail. And it changed the way Americans eat. It was the 1960s. Researchers began noticing a troubling pattern. High sugar consumption was linked to heart disease. Catastrophic news for the sugar industry. If the public found out, it could mean government regulation and consumer backlash and billions in lost profits. So the Sugar Research Foundation, now called the Sugar Association, made a decision. They decided not to fight the science. They decided to redirect it. They paid Harvard scientists. Yes, the mere fact you went to Harvard means you're smarter than the average bear in the minds of most people. So they paid these Harvard scientists, respected, credentialed, and influential, to publish studies that shifted the blame away from sugar and onto saturated fat. The message was simple. Sugar was safe. Fat was deadly. Eat more carbs. Trust healthy grains. Avoid butter and eggs and red meat. Embrace low-fat yogurts and cereals and processed snacks. And the public believed it. The public ate it up. So did doctors and schools and governments. They believed it for decades. Again, this is not speculation. This is all documented. 2016, researchers uncovered internal sugar industry documents and published their findings in the JAMA Internal Medicine. Documents revealed over $50,000 adjusted for inflation paid to Harvard scientists. The sugar industry selected the topics, edited the drafts, and approved the final papers. Studies were published in prestigious journals and used to influence national dietary guidelines. One of the leading scientists later became the head of nutrition at the USDA. which helped shape the very policies that told Americans what to eat. This wasn't a misunderstanding by any means. It was a business strategy disguised as science. Well, the fallout of course, from all this was massive. U.S. food pyramid demonized fat and elevated carbs. Schools removed healthy fats from the meals and replaced them with sugar-laden alternatives. Families swapped real food for low-fat processed snacks. Obesity, diabetes, and metabolic disorders actually skyrocketed. Damage didn't stop there. Oh no. Same sugar industry now funds wellness influencers on social media. Nutritionists to promote moderation while downplaying sugar's risk. Studies that confuse the public with contradictory headlines like sugar isn't that bad after all. This wasn't a PR campaign, not by any means. It was a generational rewrite of nutritional reality. This wasn't just lying. And everybody did what they did for the best of reasons. It was engineering belief. Big Sugar didn't just distort data. They rewrote the rules of nutrition, reshaped public policy, and reprogrammed how families fed their children for generations. And you know what the most disturbing part of it is? They did it with credibility, with Harvard credentials, with government backing, and with smiling cereal mascots and hearth-healthy labels. We're not talking about food. It's about how easily truth can be bought, how science can be weaponized, how public trust becomes a tool, not a responsibility. Because when corporations fund the research, edit the conclusions, and influence the guidelines, we're not being educated, we're being marketed. And if they could rewrite nutrition, what else has been rewritten? Health, perhaps? Maybe history. How about reality? Well, coming full circle, we're back to one of my favorite topics, UFOs. You know, we've done a couple of books on the UFO disclosure movement, and there's a lot of information. It's out there, but it's not really talked about. It's more like whispered. The government went from UFOs don't exist to, yeah, they're real. And it took less than 5 years. For nearly 100 years, the official stance regarding UFOs was quite simple. UFOs are weather balloons. Mistakes, misidentification. Nothing to see here, go home. Roswell was a misunderstanding. Area 51 is a classified facility, but it has nothing to do with UFOs or aliens. Eyewitness accounts, well, they're result of imagination, hysteria, or possibly hoaxes. And then in 2020, everything changed. Now the government's position was UFOs are real. The military sees them all the time. We just don't know what they are. There were no apologies made, no explanations given, no press conference that matched the gravity of the statement. For decades, military pilots and radar operators reported strange objects in the sky, craft that don't behave like anything known to aviation. Most of these reports were dismissed and buried or ridiculed. I saw careers ruined when people insisted on talking about what they saw. But starting in the early 2000s, something changed. Yes, Navy pilots began encountering unidentified aerial phenomena during routine training missions, especially off the coast of California and Florida. These weren't distant lights or vague shapes, and they were caught on camera. They were objects with no visible propulsion systems, craft that accelerated instantly and changed direction mid-flight, vehicles that actually hovered and dropped and darted in ways that defied known physics, and targets that were tracked on radar and infrared and visual confirmation simultaneously. These weren't isolated events, not by a long shot. They were repeated. They were documented. And they were taken seriously. at least internally. Pilots are debriefed, and videos are archived, and reports are filed. But the public didn't know anything about any of this until December 2017. New York Times published a groundbreaking article revealing the existence of a secret Pentagon program called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, or ATIP. 3 leaked military videos showed UAPs. UAP is the politically acceptable term for UFO. But it showed the UAPs in action, recorded by Navy fighter jets. Eyewitness testimony from pilots like Commander David Fravor, who described a 2004 encounter with a tic-tac shaped object that outmaneuvered his aircraft and vanished without explanation. There were videos, later known as FLIR, F-L-I-R, gimbal, and go fast, that showed fast-moving, physics-defying objects being tracked by military-grade sensors. Well, in the face of this, the Pentagon was forced to respond. In April 2020, the Department of Defense officially released the videos and confirmed they were authentic. They admitted the aerial phenomena observed in the videos remains characterized as unidentified. Put it in plain English, we ain't got a clue. This wasn't a fringe theory anymore. It's federally acknowledged strangeness. And it triggered a wave of public interest. Congressional hearings, new government offices tasked with investigating UAPs. That's unknown aerial phenomena, don't you know? And the language changed, and with it the entire narrative. Before this official admission, UFOs were considered a joke, a weather balloon, nothing to see. After the admission, UAPs are a national security issue. We need to understand what these objects are. They could actually pose a threat. Being said in all sincerity by some of the same people that said UFOs are a joke. The government rebranded the term UFO. It's now unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP, in order to shed decades of stigma and refocus the conversation on defense and intelligence and technological unknowns. Suddenly, the topic wasn't about aliens or abductions anymore. It was about airspace violations in military installations, objects and unknown propulsion systems, potential surveillance platforms from foreign adversaries, or something else entirely new. The shift was subtle, but it was powerful. It turned ridicule into responsibility, reframed mystery as mission. Now, the shift from denial to disclosure wasn't speculation, not by any means. Backed by official reports, public testimony, and government investigations. In 2020 and 2021, the Pentagon UAP Task Force reports were issued, confirmed dozens of military encounters with objects that defied known flight capabilities. Then there was the ODNI UAP report from June of 2021, analyzed 144 incidents. Most remained unexplained, posed safety and security risk. The AARO Historical Record Report from 2024 compiled decades of sightings and whistleblower claims acknowledging unresolved phenomena. And in 2022 and 2023, there were congressional hearings, featured whistleblowers and military officials calling for transparency and oversight. And of course, there was pilot testimony from Navy pilots like Fravor and Graves, described encounters of propulsionless, physics-defying craft, backed by radar and video. And there were statements from high-level officials, such as Obama and Brennan and Alonzo, publicly confirming UAPs are real and that they deserve serious investigation. The same people that said it was a joke, a fluke, and if you talked about it, you were trying to put a hoax over on the American people. We went from laughing at UFOs to the Pentagon holding PowerPoints about them. We still don't know who or what or they are. But how about the silence after the admission? That's the most interesting part. There was no mass media frenzy, no cultural reckoning, just quiet confirmation in what might pass as a shrug, as if the truth was too strange to absorb, too destabilizing to confront, too big to fit into the news cycle. We're not talking about aliens. We're talking about how reality is managed, how governments control narratives, how disclosure can happen in plain sight and still go unnoticed. Because when the extraordinary becomes official, the real mystery is why nobody reacts. For 10 years, I spoke at Roswell about what are now known as UAPs. Wrote several books. But then one of the people who live and breathe politics got control of the board of the UFO Museum. He and his cohort had written a book that was praised to high heavens. But it was a case of resting on their laurels. Our books were selling, theirs weren't. So we had to go. So we haven't been invited back. In fact, the man who became a good friend who ran the museum was shown the door because he didn't like the political shift. Well, from UAPs are real, let's talk about Operation Mockingbird. That's when the CIA infiltrated the news. Now, for most people, when they watch the news, they trust the anchor, they trust the headline, and they trust the institution putting the news out there. But what if that story wasn't journalism? What if it was intelligence messaging? Not runts, not a rumor, but a systematic campaign designed to shape your worldview without you ever knowing about it. This wasn't fiction, this was policy. I remember a time when if Walter Cronkite said it was so, it was so. Nobody questioned him. That was un-American to question Walter Cronkite. He could have been president if he wanted to. Well, what actually happened was during the Cold War, the CIA launched a covert operation known as Operation Mockingbird. The mission was to influence public opinion, domestically and abroad, by embedding itself inside the media. They didn't need to censor the stories. They just needed to guide them. The agency recruited journalists and editors, and newspaper publishers, and television producers, and foreign correspondents. These weren't spies pretending to be reporters. They were real media professionals. They were paid, they were briefed, and sometimes directly instructed by the CIA of what to say and what not to say. The goal wasn't to fabricate the headlines, it was to steer the narrative. Which stories got covered, which angles were emphasized, which voices were amplified, and which were silenced. And what the public was allowed to feel and fear, or perhaps to forget. Mockingbird wasn't about controlling the truth, it was about controlling the frame. Again, this isn't speculation. It's a documented operation, confirmed by the Church Committee's report in 1975. That's a congressional investigation that revealed the CIA maintained relationships with hundreds of journalists and media outlets. The report confirmed these assets were used to shape public perception and promote U.S. interest. There were declassified CIA documents, such as internal memos and communications that showed the agency had influence over major publications, including Time and Newsweek and the Washington Post and the New York Times. Some journalists were paid, others were persuaded. And there were testimony from former officials, whistleblowers, and ex-CIA personnel to confirm that thousands of media assets were used globally. Operation Mockingbird was not theoretical. It was funded and executed and scaled. On that note, we've come to the end of today's show. We'll be back tomorrow, and once again, we'll be talking about stories that are strange and unusual. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show saying have a truly great evening.